Welcome to the IVF Journey with Dr. Michael Chapman, the podcast for couples who struggle with infertility and want to fulfill their dreams of becoming parents. In this podcast, you'll learn actionable strategies to deal with infertility from Dr. Michael Chapman, or Prof as he's affectionately known. Prof is the co-founder of IVF Australia and is a leading Australian infertility specialist who has helped over 3,000 couples realise their dreams of becoming parents. To access previous episodes packed with ideas, solutions and tips that actually work, head over to Dr. Chapman's IVF podcast on iTunes. You can also ask questions by contacting Dr. Chapman's rooms on 1-800-111-483 or by emailing him michael.chapman@ivf.com.au.
That first cry of a baby born after the long journey of IVF remains one of the most beautiful experiences in the world. As an obstetrician and an IVF specialist, I've had the privilege of experiencing this over many thousands of times in my long career, but I still remain moved by each baby's first cry. It signifies the end of a long journey and the beginning of a new life. This is Professor Michael Chapman, co-founder of IVF Australia and host of the IVF Journey podcast. Thanks for tuning in. To access all the previous episodes, head over to my website, www.theivfjourney.com, and select IVF Journey Podcast from the navigation menu. You'll also be able to find the various services that we provide at IVF Australia. Today we're going to have a look at how somebody should prepare for the IVF journey. Let's think of the scenario where investigations have been done, diagnoses have been made, and between you and your doctor, the decision's been taken to move down the IVF track. Generally, there'll be a period of a few weeks between that decision and actually getting started, mainly because we're waiting for the next menstrual cycle. That depends a little bit on the type of cycle that your doctor has decided upon. The long agonist cycle commences in the last 7 days of the cycle prior to the stimulation, whereas the antagonist cycle, the shorter cycle, starts on day 2 of the normal menstrual period. But given there is a few weeks in which to prepare for the journey, it's sensible to think about what you need to do. There are probably 3 things that occur to me, 3 areas to be working on. The first of those is your own expectations. Obviously, you want to be pregnant and you're doing IVF to get pregnant, but there is the reality of what the chances of success are. So if you're a 35-year-old woman, the odds in general of coming away from that first cycle with a positive pregnancy test is in the order of 40%. Hopefully you'll have frozen embryos that will take your success rate to well above 50%. But there always will be some patients who, even after replacement of multiple frozen embryos from that one cycle, who will still not be pregnant. Thinking about that beforehand and not expecting a guaranteed success is going to help you through the cycle and, more importantly, deal with the potential negative pregnancy test if it comes. Part of that preparation psychologically is working with your partner, talking to your partner about what's going to happen and how you'll cope at the end of the day if you aren't successful. Obviously, if you're sharing this journey with others like best friends or parents, siblings, having them involved at this point is quite useful. They may keep your feet on the ground a bit more and will also be there if things don't go quite the way it was planned. The second area to be working on before you start a cycle is lifestyle. I personally think that there is an exaggerated response to the notion that all vices should be disposed of and avoided in the lead up to a cycle. First of all, a few weeks of not drinking, not smoking, doing lots of exercise is not going to change the world. The situation with your eggs and the sperm, the die is probably already cast, and a short burst of change in lifestyle is not going to make a huge difference, other than potentially further increasing the stress because you're doing something which is not normal. On the other hand, I think everything needs to be in moderation, but I certainly don't ban my patients having the occasional glass of wine after a nice meal or with a nice meal. I would probably say don't smoke, but as I say, it's probably not going to make any difference. In terms of exercise, you're not going to lose 5 kilos in a few weeks, so take it easy, do what you normally do. So I suppose that's the message I'm trying to get across, is be normal, don't be exceptional. And the third important aspect of preparing for IVF is to understand what you're going to be going through, to plan what impact it will have on your day-to-day life in terms of the injections that you require, the bloods and scans that you're going to have to attend the clinic for, and what you're going to do in relation to the egg collection and embryo transfer days. It's worth thinking those things through. In a good clinic where the nurses are attuned to patients' needs, the necessity of patients understanding exactly what's happening on a day-to-day basis is to some extent taken away. There's no need to stress that you don't know what's going to happen in 2 days' time, because the nurses will tell you. They'll sort your program out. So establishing a good relationship with the nursing staff in the clinic is very important. They're busy people, but they're there to care for you. There is a need to be somewhat flexible because patients do vary in their requirements of the nurse's time. And it may be you that is spending an extra 5 or 10 minutes talking about your worries of the day with the nurses, which may in fact delay another patient. So be tolerant during the cycle. Again, the good clinics provide the monitoring at times outside of normal working hours in the morning so that it doesn't interrupt the day's work. Those clinics that cut corners often force the patients into having their bloods and scans done during working hours, which obviously impacts not only on that particular day that a scan and a blood is done, but people at work then learn about what's going on. And for some people that can be a negative influence going forwards into the future. Most of you will want to keep it reasonably quiet that you're going through IVF, at least quiet in the workplace. So read about the way in which the clinic works, read the literature that almost all clinics have telling you what days certain things happen and what to expect. So in preparation for the cycle, some work with informing yourself is actually very useful. But I reiterate, a good clinic will have nurses that will help you through the actual program. So you can do all these things leading up to a cycle, and despite everything that I've said, 99% of women that go through an IVF cycle, there will be stress, there will be overestimation of expectation, and therefore, if it doesn't succeed, significant disappointment. So being ready for that disappointment is a very important concept to think about before you start. Ultimately, your body is determining the success of your cycle. The quality of your eggs, the quality of the sperm, probably the most vital part of whether you'll succeed or not. And really you can't do very much about that. Just going back to expectations. When you go into a cycle, you do think that you're going to be the one that succeeds, despite what I tell you about 40% or whatever the percentage is. You'll come to the first blood test and the nurses will ring you in the afternoon and say, great result. Your hormones are going up beautifully. You'll come back for a scan a couple of days later and there'll be follicles there. And not just 1 or 2, but 4, 5, 6 follicles. Excellent. And you come back in another 2 days' time and there are now 10, 15 good-sized follicles. What you're thinking, what the nurses are thinking, and what I'm thinking is we're on the road to success. But we haven't really improved your odds. The odds are still sitting there at the 40% mark. We then collect the eggs. and we get our 10 eggs, just what we wanted. Again, we know what's going to happen from the scientific point of view, but patients think that with 10 eggs, they're going to be guaranteed a pregnancy. Sadly, that's not necessarily the case. At this point, you're at the top of the roller coaster. The anticipation of what's going to happen next awaits you. A couple of days later, the scientist will ring you and say, well, of the 10 eggs, we've fertilized 8 of them and 6 of them have moved on really well. The disappointment is starting to show itself. Why didn't all of them fertilize? Unfortunately, that's nature. To get 60% of the eggs becoming nice day 2 or day 3 embryos is actually a very good result. We then grow them on till 5 days and you arrive to have your embryo transfer. And scientists will tell you it's great news, we've got 2 blastocysts, one for freezing and one to put back. For the vast majority of patients, that will be a significant disappointment unless you've thought that through, that you've accepted the warnings that have been given to you. 2 blastocysts from 10 eggs is actually a good result and will give you up to a 65% chance of a pregnancy if you're under 38. Then the embryo is put back, and then comes the hardest part of the cycle, the wait to see whether you're pregnant or not. And almost all patients say that is the worst part of the whole process. Am I not? Probably 30 or 40% of patients will start to have a period before they have the blood test done, and that almost certainly means you have not been successful. Then you have the pregnancy test if you haven't had a bleed, and again 40% will end up pregnant, but 60% will not. A period will then come and decisions will need to be made about going forward. Preparation for that whole roller coaster of thinking it through beforehand, of listening to talks like this, can only be of benefit to flatten out the roller coaster ride and enable you to carry on in your quest for a pregnancy. And don't forget that you can access all the previous episodes by going to our website www.theivfjourney.com and select IVF Journey podcast from the navigation menu.
Thank you for listening to the IVF Journey with Dr. Michael Chapman, the podcast which helps couples negotiate their way through the IVF journey, all the way to parenthood. You can also ask questions by contacting Dr. Chapman's rooms on 1800 111 483 or by emailing him michael.chapman@ivf.com.au.